Old Grumpy Hunter here. Welcome to Flight Times. This video is inspired by a conversation between some of my viewers of my last video and was suggested by Bill from Horn and Finn's Outdoors.
Hello, my name is Grundle with Horn and Finn Outdoors, and I have been an avid archery hunter for about the last 40 years with both a crossbow and a compound bow. I've had the opportunity to hunt all different kinds of animals. I really enjoy the challenge behind it, and hopefully I'll be able to continue archery hunting for another 40 years. Recently, I was having a debate with a guy on one of Old Grumpy Hunter's videos who said that there is no such thing as an ethical archery shot past 40 yards. So I asked Grumpy to make a video because he's the man with all the scientific facts behind everything, and I wanted to do a comparison of crossbows and also bows with their flight times and speed and force when it hits the target. One of the things this gentleman was saying was that an animal can move while the arrow's in flight, which yes, it's possible, but he said that there's no ethical shot past 40 yards, even 42, 44, 45 yards, he said was not ethical. So I'm interested to see what Old Grumpy Hunter came up with. Hope you enjoy the video. I think I'm going to. Let's check it out.
It's a collaboration of information of real data from Horn and Finn Outdoors, Death by Bungee, along with some of my own data that I'm going to dissect here. In the aforementioned conversation, 50 yards is mentioned as an applied maximum shooting distance for the crossbow, while others mentioned that they use the 10% rule as their maximum distance. There were some who said they had no problem with taking a shot at any distance. I'm not debating what someone's maximum shooting distance is for this video. That is a distance that each person must decide on their own.
Man's got to know his limitations.
What is the 10% rule?
The 10% rule states that you take your initial speed for your arrow weight bow combination, divide the speed by 10, and the result is your maximum shooting distance.
Flight times are not linear. An arrow that takes 0.07 seconds to go 10 yards will take more than 4 times that to go 40 yards. We'll see more of that later. The arrow speed combinations for this video are 350 feet per second, 400 grains, 400 feet per second at 400 grains, and 450 feet at 400 grains. All the ballistic information was obtained by using the ballistic calculator from the Death by Bungee Old Grumpy Hunter joint project. It was cross-checked with a different online calculator called Archery and Crossbow Ballistic Calculator. Here are the results side by side of the arrow weighing 400 grains at 400 feet per second. As you see, the only difference in flight times is the number of decimal points. The animal drop and reaction times were obtained by using the Death by Bungee Old Grumpy Hunter Joint Project Reaction Time Calculator. All the calculations were made using the default settings in the ballistics calculator. Arrow length 20 inches, shaft diameter 0.346 inches, vane length 3.75 inches, vane height 0.5 inches. And all the calculations were based on the target and the bow at the same level. We're going to look at the following: flight times, arrow rise, trajectory or flight path, and the reaction time difference for each of the 3 speed weight combinations. Using the 10% rule, 35 yards, the arrow will take 0.308 seconds. It takes 0.444 seconds to go 50 yards. And out to 100 yards, it takes almost a full second, 0.921 seconds. Here's a prime example where flight times are not linear. The time difference between 50 and 100 yards is more than double. So how much does the arrow rise at those 3 distances? At 35 yards, it has a maximum climb of 4.565 inches. At 50 yards, only an additional 15 yards, the climb is almost double at 9 inches. Out to 100 yards, the climb is more than 4.5 times greater than that at 40.9 inches. To get to 100 yards, the launch angle is much greater than the launch angle for the 10% rule. So much that the arrow will go out of sight in the scope and reappear as it travels downrange. Flight time also has an effect on what happens downrange. Here we see all three distances the arrow reaches the target after the animal has time to react to the sound of the shot or seeing movement. At 100 yards, it's over half a second. Moving on to the 400 feet per second, 450 feet per second arrows, we're going to see a lot of similarities. But let's dive in. With the arrow at 400 feet per second, the flight time is going to be shorter at 50 and 100 yards, but the 10% rule, the flight time is a tad longer. But that should be expected since we're going an additional 5 yards. At 100 yards, the flight time is over 3/4 of a second. Using the 10% rule at 40 yards, the arrow will take 0.309 seconds. It takes 0.389 seconds to go 50 yards, and out to 100 yards it takes 0.806 seconds. Again, the time difference between 50 and 100 yards is more than double. At 40 yards, the arrow has a maximum climb of 4.6 inches. At 50 yards, only an additional 10 yards, the climb is 7.3 inches. That additional 10 yards results in over 1.5 times the climb. Out to 100 yards, that climb is more than 4.25 times greater than at 50 yards. The flight path for the 400 feet per second arrow is similar to the 350 feet per second arrow. Arrow is going to leave the scope and reappear when shot to 100 yards. At 100 yards, the arrow reaches the target at 0.44 seconds after the target may be on the move. At 450 feet per second, the flight times between the 10% rule and 50 yards are only 0.035 seconds apart. Not really much to worry about. Out to 100 yards, the time is just under 3/4 of a second at 0.716 seconds. Arrow climb between 10% rule, 45 yards, and 50 yards is a difference of 1.2 inches, and out to 100 yards is 24.7 inches. That's just over 4.25 times greater than the climb for 50 yards. The flight path for the 450 feet per second arrow looks a lot like the flight paths for both the 350 and the 400 feet per second arrow, with the 10% rule being the flattest. Like the other two arrows, the arrow gets to the target after the target can start to move at all three distances. So far we've looked at the different speeds, but now let's take a different direction and look at the distances. Starting with the 10% rule, we already know that the distances are not the same, so in a way, we're comparing apples to oranges, but here goes. The flight times are almost identical for all three arrows at all three distances. Between the three of them, they have an average flight time of 0.309 seconds. Arrow rise for all three speeds at the respective distances has a spread of 4/100th of an inch, ranging from 4.59 to 4.63 inches. Like the arrow rise, the flight paths of all three arrows are similar. Even though the flight times are almost identical, the time difference between the arrow arriving and the possible animal movement is just under 1/10 of a second at 45 yards and just over 1/10 of a second at both 350 feet and 400 feet per second arrows. All three times fall within the time it takes you to blink your eye. 350 foot per second arrow takes almost a half a second to go 50 yards. The 400 feet per second arrow takes just over 3/8 of a second. The 450 feet per second arrow has the shortest flight time of just under 3/8 of a second. The time difference between 350 feet per second and 450 feet per second is only 0.099 seconds. That's less than it takes time to blink an eye. The arrow rise for 50 yards is between 5.8 inches for 450 feet per second and 9.5 inches for 350 feet per second. The flight path for the 350 feet per second arrow has a steeper angle of launch. and as already pointed out, climbs to 9.5 inches. That's 1.6 times higher than the 450 foot per second arrow. Assuming your target moves, it has the potential to be on the move before any of the arrows reach it. With a 350 foot per second arrow, the difference is over 1/5 of a second. The 450 foot per second arrow, the difference is just a bit over 1/10 of a second, or just about half the time. At 450 feet per second, the flight time is almost 3/4 of a second. At 350 feet per second, the arrow takes almost a full second, while the 400 foot per second arrow takes just over 4/5 of a second. Out to 100 yards, all the arrow climbs are over 2 feet. 350 feet per second arrow has a rise of 40.9 inches. All three most likely are going to leave your scope and reappear before reaching the target. The flight path for all three arrows out to 100 yards looks a lot like the 50-yard one, but it has a greater climb, a steeper launch angle, and steeper descent angles. At 100 yards, the difference between the arrow arriving and the possible movement of the target ranges from almost 3/8 of a second to over half a second.
Grundle said that you were going to talk about force.
Thanks for the reminder, Melissa. Hello, I'm Oliver Storyteller. You can call me Ollie. Old Grumpy Hunter asked me to talk about kinetic energy and momentum. Looking at the 350 feet per second arrow first, the initial kinetic energy is 108.8 foot-pounds, and the momentum is 0.621 slugs. At 35 yards, the 10% rule, the speed is 333.2 feet per second, kinetic energy is 98.6 foot-pounds, and the momentum is 0.591 slugs. That is a loss of 16.8 feet per second, 10.2 foot-pounds, and 0.03 slugs, resulting in a percent retention of 95.20% in speed. Kinetic energy retained 90.63%. The momentum was kept at 95.17%. At 50 yards, the speed is 326.4 feet per second. Kinetic energy is 94.4 foot-pounds, and the momentum is 0.579 slugs. That is a loss of 23.6 feet per second, 14.4 foot-pounds, and 0.042 slugs, resulting in a retention of 93.26% of the speed. Kinetic energy held on to 86.76%, and the momentum kept 93.24%. At 100 yards, the speed is 305.2 feet per second, kinetic energy is 82.7 foot-pounds, and the momentum is 0.542 slugs. That is a loss of 44.8 feet per second, 26.1 foot-pounds, and 0.079 slugs, resulting in a speed retention of 87.20%. The kinetic energy remains at 76.01%, and the momentum is at 87.28%. With a speed of 400 feet per second, the initial kinetic energy is 142.1 foot-pounds with a momentum of 0.710 slugs. At 40 yards, 10% rule, the speed is now 378.2 feet per second. That is a loss of 21.8 feet per second, which means there is a 94.55% retention of speed. At the target, the kinetic energy is at 127 foot-pounds for a loss of 15.1 foot-pounds, resulting in a retention of 89.37%. The momentum at 40 yards is at 0.671 slugs, or 94.51% is retained. At 50 yards, the speed is now 372.9 feet per second. That is a loss of 27.1 feet per second, which means there is a 93.23% retention of speed. At the target, the kinetic energy is at 123.5 foot-pounds for a loss of 18.6 foot-pounds, resulting in a retention of 86.91%. The momentum is now 0.662 slugs, down 0.048 slugs, or 93.24%. At 100 yards, the speed is now 348.2 feet per second. That is a loss of 51.8 feet per second, which means there is an 87.05% retention of speed. At the target, the kinetic energy is at 107.7 foot-pounds for a loss of 34.4 foot-pounds. The kinetic energy retention is 75.79%. The momentum is now 0.618 slugs, down 0.092 slugs, or 87.04%. With a speed of 450 feet per second, the initial kinetic energy is 179.8 foot-pounds, with a momentum of 0.799 slugs. At 45 yards, 10% rule, the speed is now 422.4 feet per second. That is a loss of 27.6 feet per second, which means there is a 93.87% retention of speed. The kinetic energy at the target is at 158.5 foot-pounds for a loss of 21.3 foot-pounds, resulting in a retention of 88.15%. The momentum at 45 yards is at 0.750 slugs, down 0.049 slugs, and 93.87% is retained. At 50 yards, the speed is now 419.5 feet per second. That is a loss of 30.5 feet per second. There is a 93.22% retention of speed. The kinetic energy is at 156.3 foot-pounds for a loss of 23.5 foot-pounds, resulting in a retention of 86.93%. The momentum is at 0.744 slugs, down 0.055 slugs, with a 93.12% retention. At 100 yards, the speed is now 391.4 feet per second. That is down 58.6 feet per second, and there is an 86.93% retention of speed. At the target, the kinetic energy is at 136.1 foot-pounds for a loss of 43.7 foot-pounds. The kinetic energy retention is 75.70%. The momentum is now 0.695 slugs, down 0.104 slugs, or 86.98%.
I'm going to be switching gears here for a moment or two and talk about deer jumping the string. I know that some hunters believe that jumping the string is a myth, and others believe it's a reality, and I'm not here to change your mind. But let's look at how far a deer can drop to load its legs to run. This drop is not the deer pulling itself down, but just dropping. By relaxing their muscles while bending their legs, gravity is pulling their deer down at 32.2 feet per second squared. Deer cannot grip the dirt and use their leg muscles to pull down with. Thus, mortal humans have an average reaction time to hearing or seeing something about 0.15 seconds. Although it's difficult to measure the deer's reaction time, it's assumed that the deer's reaction time is faster than humans and is about 0.1 second. For this discussion, I'll be using 0.1 seconds for the deer's reaction time. The deer's hearing is similar to humans, but they can hear ultra-high frequencies, which means they may hear the arrow as it flies through the air. Looking here, we see that the closer you are to the deer, the less potential animal drop you have. The blue bar represents the 10% rule. All of these drops can be compensated for aiming lower. The red bar is potential drop at 50 yards. The 400 feet per second and the 450 feet per second arrows have a good chance of getting it done. But with the 350 feet per second arrow at 50 yards, you're most likely going to be aiming at the ground and below the deer. The 100-yard shot, the yellow bar, with 300 feet per second, the deer has potential to be underground if it can dig. The 400 foot per second arrow gets to the deer as it's just about laying on the ground, and the 450 foot arrow gets to the deer just above that. By now you're wondering how far of a shot I can take before the animal gets a chance to move. Unfortunately, it's not as far as you think it is. At 350 feet per second, it's only 16 yards. 20 yards for 400 feet per second, and 450 feet per second, it's out to 24 yards. All of those flight times are under 0.2 of a second. 350 feet per second, it takes 0.139 seconds. It takes a 0.152 seconds for 400 feet per second. 450 feet per second, it takes 0.163 seconds. Let's get up close and personal. Even though modern crossbow scopes have verticals with lines to 100 yards, and some even have rangefinders built in that'll indicate where to aim, and some crossbows have broken the 500 foot per second wall, isn't archery, in whatever form you're using, an up close and personal type of hunt? Of course, up close and personal is a subjective term, and what that means to me, Old Grumpy Hunter, or Rich from Death by Bungee, or Bill from Horn and Fin Outdoors, is most likely to be three different things, and yours is going to be something else. We're not telling you what up close and personal should mean to you. Just for the sake of discussion, let's say you've decided for whatever reason your maximum comfortable shooting distance is 35 yards. And over the years you've collected 3 crossbows that have the same initial speed as we've been talking about. Of course, the 450 foot per second arrow is going to have the shortest flight time out to 35 yards. The 350 feet per second arrow is going to have the longest flight time. Well, obviously. But it's really not that much shorter. We're talking 0.069 seconds at 35 yards.
There are some reasons why you may not want to take shots with long flight times. Eyes and ears. The more deer or other prey that are in front of you, the greater the chance of being spotted or heard. Movement. You cannot rely on an animal to stand still as you wait for your arrow to reach it. The environment. What is the wind doing downrange? The longer the arrow is in flight, the greater the effect the wind has on it. Are you shooting across an open field or in the woods? Obstacles. Can you see every little twig, limb, etc. while looking through the scope? Remember the amount of arrow rise.
Can you take a long shot with a long flight time? Yes, you can. Here's Rich from Death by Bungee taking an 81-yard shot with the original Bungee.
Oh, this is the most convenient thing ever. Well, I got a clear shot, I can tell you that one. 81. Wait.
Here's Rich with the original Bungee going to take a 80-yard shot at a target. Pay attention to the sound of the release and then the sound of the arrow hitting the target.
Wait a minute. Is it there yet?
Is it there yet? That's great.
Is it there yet?
I mean, honestly, it could be in the bullseye and that Luminox up so high because it was coming in.
Coming in from the moon.
Yeah. At 80 yards, we do know it's got an angle of trajectory
that could be dead on.
Something less than horizontal.
Yeah. It's just at a 45-degree angle.
And again, here's Rich taking a much shorter shot with a long flight time with the original Bungee.
44 yards in the cold with a 1,000 grain arrow. Bungee and I, we're gonna take that shot.
Can you take a long shot where the arrow climbs so high that it leaves the scope and reappears? Yes, you can. Here's Grundle from Horn and Fin Outdoors shooting at a target with his Raven R29X out to 78 yards. Let's watch that in slow motion. Here we see the lighted knock just after it left the bow. Note that it's at the top of the target. It may not have left the side of the scope, I'm not sure. But note the position of the knock here. That blocked target is only 20 inches tall. For those of you who do not know Grundle and the Horn and Fin Outdoor YouTube channel, I hope you enjoy this short little intro video of his. Check his channel out. You'll enjoy it.
Welcome to Horn and Fin Outdoors. My name is Grundle, and I am an avid outdoorsman who loves anything to do with hunting, fishing, or just plain old getting outside in nature. I hope you like the content that I post on my channel. Here's a little taste of it, and until I see you on the next video, I wish you nothing but tight lines and short blood trails. Welcome aboard.
Facts are stubborn things, and whatever may be our wishes, our inclinations, or the dictates of our passion, they cannot alter the state of facts and evidence. John Adams, 2nd President of the United States.
Thank you for watching this Old Grumpy Hunter production. Please give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe if you have not already done so. And don't forget to click the notification bell. Share this video with your friends. It helps the channel and Old Grumpy Hunter reach more people.